When you start leveling up, something strange happens. Not everyone claps, not everyone stays, and that's not bad luck. That's feedback. Growth has a cost. Elevation changes the room, and when you rise, you don't lose everyone. You lose the people who were never meant to go where you're headed. This isn't about ego, it's about alignment, because the wrong people get uncomfortable when you stop shrinking to keep them comfortable. Today, I want to talk about why loss is often proof of progress, and how outgrowing people isn't betrayal. It's discipline. Growth reveals misalignment because growth changes your standards before it changes your circumstances. When you decide to level up, you stop negotiating with yourself. You become clearer about what you tolerate, how you spend your time, and what kind of energy you allow around you. That clarity doesn't announce itself loudly, but people feel it. Conversations shift. Jokes don't land the same. Behaviors you once ignored start to stand out. What used to feel normal begins to feel heavy. That's not arrogance, it's awareness. Most relationships are built on shared habits, not shared direction. When you grow, your habits change first. You wake up earlier, you think longer before reacting. You start choosing discipline over impulse. And when one person evolves and the other stays attached to the old version of you, friction is inevitable. Not because anyone is evil, but because alignment has changed. Growth doesn't create distance, it exposes the distance that was already there. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries will feel threatened by your self-respect. People who are comfortable with your silence will struggle when you start speaking clearly. Growth removes your need for approval, and that unsettles those who are used to having influence over you. They may call you different, cold, selfish, or difficult. What they are really reacting to is the loss of access to the old version of you. Misalignment shows up subtly, support becomes conditional, encouragement turns into sarcasm. Advice becomes discouragement disguised as concern. You notice who listens to understand and who listens to respond. You notice who celebrates your progress and who competes with it. Growth sharpens your perception, and once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. This is where most people get confused. They think something is wrong because relationships feel strained. They assume growth should make everything smoother, but growth isn't designed to keep everyone comfortable. It's designed to move you forward, and forward movement naturally separates what can keep up from what cannot. Elevation changes the environment, and not everyone can breathe at the same altitude. Some people don't want you to grow past the version of you they could predict. Your evolution disrupts their sense of control, their self-image, or their excuses. When you rise, it forces them to confront where they've stayed the same. That discomfort often comes out as resistance toward you. Not because of who you are becoming, but because of what your growth reflects back to them. Growth also reveals misalignment within you. You realize how often you compromised your values to maintain peace. You see where loyalty was confused with self-abandonment. You recognize patterns you repeated just to feel accepted. Growth strips away denial and replaces it with responsibility. You stop blaming circumstances and start choosing differently. That internal shift alone can make old dynamics unsustainable. This phase requires emotional discipline. Not everyone who becomes misaligned needs to be confronted, explained to, or convinced. Growth teaches you that clarity is more powerful than argument. You don't need to prove your evolution, you live it. And in doing so, the right people adjust naturally while the wrong ones remove themselves. Growth is honest. It doesn't negotiate with comfort. It reveals who aligns with your future and who is only connected to your past. Elevation changes relationships because rising shifts your position, your perspective, and your pace. When you elevate, you don't just move up, you move differently. You see farther, you respond slower, you stop reacting emotionally to things that once controlled you. That change alone alters how people relate to you because relationships are often built around shared emotional patterns. When those patterns break, the relationship has to evolve or dissolve. As you elevate, your priorities sharpen. You become intentional with your time, selective with your energy, and protective of your focus. Casual access to you disappears. Late night conversations turn into early mornings of solitude. Drama feels expensive. This isn't distance for the sake of distance. It's refinement, and refinement can feel like rejection to those who are used to unlimited access. Elevation also introduces asymmetry. You may still understand where others are coming from, but they may no longer understand where you're going. That gap creates misunderstandings. Your silence gets misread as arrogance. Your boundaries get labeled as ego. Your discipline gets mistaken for detachment. The truth is, elevation requires restraint, and restraint looks cold to people who rely on chaos to feel connected. Some relationships depend on sameness. When two people grow at the same pace, elevation strengthens the bond. But when one rises and the other resists change, the relationship begins to strain. Conversations stay surface level, goals no longer overlap. One person talks about the future, the other keeps revisiting the past. Elevation exposes these differences because it demands forward movement. People who stay comfortable often feel abandoned when you elevate. Not because you left them behind intentionally, but because your movement highlights their stillness. Your progress becomes a mirror they didn't ask for. Instead of using it as motivation, some choose resentment. They question your choices, minimize your wins, or subtly remind you of who you used to be, hoping you'll step back down to restore balance. Elevation also shifts power dynamics. When you no longer need validation, approval loses its leverage. When you no longer chase attention, influence changes hands. This can unsettle relationships that were built on dependency rather than mutual respect. The more self-directed you become, the less controllable you are, and not everyone is comfortable with that version of you. There's also the loneliness of elevation. Fewer people can meet you where you are, not because they lack value, but because elevation narrows the field, standards rise, tolerance drops, the room gets quieter. That quiet can feel unsettling if you're used to noise, but it's in that silence that clarity lives. Relationships that survive elevation do so because they're rooted in respect, not convenience. Elevation doesn't require you to look down on anyone. It requires you to look ahead. You can honor where people are without returning to where you've been. You can care without conforming. You can love without lowering your standards. That balance is difficult, and many relationships don't survive the adjustment. Elevation is not about superiority. It's about responsibility. And responsibility changes how you show up, how you connect, and who can walk beside you. Comfort resists discipline because comfort is designed to preserve what already exists, while discipline is designed to create what does not yet exist. Comfort wants familiarity, predictability, and emotional ease. Discipline demands effort, structure, and delayed gratification. The moment you choose discipline, you disrupt comfort's control, and anything or anyone invested in that comfort will push back. Most people don't fear failure as much as they fear discomfort. Discipline requires you to show up when motivation disappears. It asks you to keep promises no one else is enforcing. Comfort, on the other hand, offers permission to delay, excuse, and rationalize. It rewards you with relief instead of results. When you choose discipline, you are choosing long-term self-respect over short-term relief, and that choice is rarely supported by environments built on ease. Relationships formed in comfort often struggle when discipline enters the picture. If people are used to bonding over shared distractions, shared complaints, or shared avoidance, your disciplined behavior breaks the pattern. Suddenly you're unavailable, you say no more often, you leave earlier, you don't indulge every conversation. What feels like growth to you feels like rejection to them. Comfort interprets discipline as judgment even when none is intended. Discipline exposes patterns people would rather keep hidden. It highlights inconsistency. It makes excuses visible. When you operate with structure and intention, it quietly challenges those who rely on impulse. They may criticize your routines, mock your boundaries, or frame your discipline as obsession. This isn't about your behavior, it's about their discomfort with the standard your discipline represents. Comfort thrives on emotional regulation through avoidance. Discipline regulates emotions through responsibility. One numbs, the other builds. When you stop numbing yourself with comfort, you feel more. You become aware of wasted time, misaligned relationships, and unfulfilled potential. That awareness is uncomfortable, which is why many people retreat back to what's familiar. Discipline doesn't offer escape, it offers accountability. There is also an identity shift that comfort resists. Comfort is tied to who you've been. Discipline is tied to who you're becoming. When you commit to discipline, you let go of the version of yourself that needed constant reassurance or external validation. You stop waiting for the right mood. You act based on values instead of feelings. That shift threatens comfort because comfort depends on emotional dependency. Comfort will argue that you're doing too much, moving too fast, or taking life too seriously. It will tell you to relax, to enjoy the moment, to stop being so intense. Discipline understands that peace is built, not stumbled upon. It knows that freedom comes from structure, not from indulgence. The resistance you feel isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's proof that discipline is replacing habit. Discipline also requires solitude at times, and comfort prefers company. Alone time removes distractions. It forces honesty. In solitude, excuses lose their power. Comfort resists that silence because silence demands reflection. Discipline uses it to recalibrate. This is why choosing discipline can feel isolating before it feels empowering. Comfort will always offer an easier way back. Discipline offers a harder way forward. The tension between the two never disappears, but the more you choose discipline, the quieter comfort becomes. Loss is a signal, not a failure, because not everything that leaves your life is meant to be held onto. We're conditioned to associate loss with weakness, rejection, or poor judgment, but loss often arrives as information. It shows you what no longer fits, what no longer aligns, and what cannot survive the next version of you. When something falls away during growth, it's not punishment, it's feedback. Many people try to hold on to relationships, habits, and identities long after they've expired, simply to avoid the discomfort of letting go. But growth applies pressure, and under pressure, what isn't solid cracks. Loss reveals structural weaknesses you may have ignored when things were easy. What you lose during elevation is rarely random. It's usually what depended on your stagnation to survive. Loss also recalibrates your priorities. When something or someone exits your life, it creates space. That space can feel empty at first, but emptiness is not absence, it's availability. Loss removes noise so clarity can enter. It forces you to evaluate what truly matters instead of what merely filled time. Without loss, there is no refinement. Emotionally, loss triggers grief even when the separation is necessary. That grief doesn't mean the loss was wrong. It means attachment existed. Discipline doesn't erase emotion. It teaches you not to let emotion override truth. You can miss someone and still accept that they no longer belong in your future. Loss teaches emotional maturity by separating longing from logic. Loss also exposes how much of your identity was tied to external validation. When approval, familiarity, or companionship disappears, you're left with yourself. That confrontation can feel destabilizing, but it's essential. Loss strips away borrowed confidence and forces you to build something internal. It challenges you to stand without leaning on what once held you up. Some losses happen quietly. Texts stop coming. Invitations slow down. Access fades. There's no dramatic ending, just gradual distance. These subtle losses are often the most instructive because they reveal truth without confrontation. They show you who stays without being chased and who disappears when effort is required. Loss doesn't always shout, sometimes it whispers. Loss also acts as protection. What leaves your life during growth often would have limited your next level. Some connections can't survive responsibility, structure, or higher standards. Their exit saves you from compromise you haven't yet been forced to make. Loss removes liabilities before they become obstacles. People often try to replace loss immediately to avoid feeling the gap. But rushing to fill space prevents learning. Loss demands reflection. It asks you to sit with discomfort long enough to understand what was gained through what was removed. Every loss carries a lesson, but only if you pause long enough to read it. Loss reshapes perspective. It teaches you that stability doesn't come from holding on, but from adaptability. You learn that you can survive change, that absence doesn't equal collapse, and that resilience grows through release. What remains after loss is often more aligned, more honest, and more sustainable. Loss isn't the end of something valuable, it's the removal of what no longer supports who you're becoming. The right people rise with you because true alignment isn't threatened by growth, it's strengthened by it. When you elevate, those who belong in your life don't compete with your progress or question your evolution. They adjust, they learn, they grow alongside you, not out of obligation, but out of shared direction and mutual respect. These people don't require you to explain your discipline or justify your boundaries. They understand that your focus has weight, that your time is valuable, and that your growth demands intention. They don't interpret your structure as distance or your silence as rejection. They recognize it as commitment. The right people respect the cost of elevation because they're paying a cost of their own. Alignment shows up in behavior, not words. The right people show consistency when it's inconvenient. They support your progress even when it highlights their own areas for improvement. Instead of feeling diminished by your success, they feel inspired by it. Your wins don't threaten them because your path doesn't invalidate theirs. Growth doesn't create rivalry, it creates reinforcement. Rising together doesn't mean identical journeys. The right people may move at different speeds or pursue different goals, but the direction remains compatible. There is no need to drag or be dragged. There's space for independence without disconnection. Conversations evolve instead of looping. Challenges are discussed honestly, without manipulation or guilt. Growth becomes a shared language rather than a dividing line. The right people hold you to your standards, not their comfort. They remind you who you said you wanted to become when motivation fades. They don't romanticize your potential, they respect your discipline. When you slip, they correct you privately, not publicly. When you succeed, they don't need credit. Their loyalty is quiet, grounded, and consistent. These relationships feel lighter even when the work is heavy. There's no need for constant reassurance, no fear of outgrowing each other, no pressure to perform. Trust replaces control. Support replaces dependency. You don't have to shrink to maintain peace, and you don't have to overextend to prove loyalty. Growth is allowed to be honest. The right people also know when to give space. They don't demand access during your focused seasons. They understand that distance doesn't mean disconnection. They stay present without hovering, supportive without intruding. That emotional maturity is rare, and it's a sign of real alignment. Rising with the right people doesn't eliminate conflict, but it changes how conflict is handled. There's accountability without hostility, correction without contempt. Problems are addressed, not avoided. Growth requires truth, and the right people can handle it. They value resolution over comfort and clarity over convenience. Over time, these relationships compound. Trust deepens, respect solidifies. Shared experiences build resilience. The circle may be smaller, but it's stronger. Fewer people, less noise, more alignment. Rising together creates stability that isn't dependent on circumstances, only on character. The right people don't cling to who you were. They walk with who you're becoming.